Ladies and gentlemen, the Pokemon Company has officially responded to the existence of Palworld and the fact that it is currently taking the internet by storm. The Pokemon Company's official statement came around the same time that Palworld has sold over 8 million copies in less than 6 days. So today we're going to go over the Pokemon Company's official statement, and then we're going to get into some details as to why I think Nintendo will probably have a pretty difficult time trying to sue Pocket Pair Games, the studio that brings us Palworld, and some of the key differences between Palworld and Pokemon that could potentially keep them safe legally. Now, before we get into this, of course, I am not a lawyer, so this is not legal advice. If you guys are currently developing your own Pokemon fan-made game, first of all, good luck. Second of all, hire a lawyer. And second of all, I just want to quickly thank you guys for all the crazy support on my recent videos. It really does mean a lot to me, and some of you guys still aren't subscribed yet, so go ahead and click that button and drop a thumbs up while you're down there. Okay, let's jump into the Pokemon Company's statement. Of course, the Pokemon Company is a Japanese company. It is, I mean, we're talking about Nintendo here. Okay, so let's take a look at their English statement. Inquiries regarding other companies' games. We have received many inquiries regarding other companies' game released in January of 2024. So here they are trying to literally call out Palworld without even mentioning the name of the game. They do not want this game to get even an ounce more popular just by them name dropping it. Okay, which I think is really funny and of course a little bit petty, but I don't expect that. Like, of course they're going to do that. Of course they're not going to mention the actual name of the game. They go on to say, we have not granted any permission for the use of Pokemon intellectual property or assets in that game. Now, so far there is no evidence of actual Pokemon assets being present in Palworld. I know at the beginning of Palworld's life a couple of days ago, some people on Twitter and in YouTube videos suggested that some of the 3D models and wire mesh of the pals was basically ripped straight from Pokemon and then kind of reskinned and dropped into Palworld. And as it turns out, that was fake news. There are no one-to-one mesh ripoffs from official Pokemon games, at least not that I have seen. And of course, lots of the pals look similar to Pokemon, but none of them actually are identical. So for example, there is no pal that looks identical to Pikachu or a pal that looks identical to Bulbasaur. Many of them are clearly inspired by Pokemon, and some of them overlap maybe 80 or 90%, right? I mean, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but so far as from what I have seen, and I've played the game for over a dozen hours now, there is no actual copy and paste of intellectual property or assets. So we'll have to see how that plays out, and if Nintendo or the Pokemon Company can prove otherwise, that'll be really interesting. They go on to say, we intend to investigate and take appropriate measures to address any acts that infringe on intellectual property rights related to the Pokemon. We will continue to cherish and nurture each and every Pokemon and its world and work to bring the world together through Pokemon in the future. So a little bit of a admirable and inspirational quote there at the end, and this is my personal opinion, but my counter to this statement would be, okay, if you love Pokemon as a franchise so much, why have your recent games been actual garbage? Like, they've been genuinely bad games. Objectively speaking, they've performed very poorly from a graphical perspective, from a frame rate perspective, and we're talking about games that are on the Switch, which is obviously outdated hardware, but you have games like Tears of the Kingdom and Breath of the Wild and Xenoblade, right? There's tons of other games on the Switch that look amazing, and so there's really no excuse there other than the fact that I think Nintendo and the Pokemon Company continue to have a small development studio at Game Freak, and we're not building games for the Game Boy Color anymore. We're building AAA titles, and they're being built horribly, if I'm being honest with you guys. And that's pretty much it from the Pokemon Company. This is all that they've had to say, and I think it was only a matter of time before they actually made an official statement. Nintendo was trending on Twitter for like 2 or 3 days straight, and it makes sense, right? Because Pokemon Legends Arceus was kind of like Nintendo's first attempt at testing the waters of a real genuine open world Pokemon game that kind of breaks free of the traditional Pokemon gameplay loop. And this game, as of March 31st 2023, which this statistic is a little bit old here, okay, I mean, we're already in almost February of 2024, so this is almost a year old, this statistic, but Legends Arceus has sold over 14.83 million copies. Let's just say that it sold another million in the last year, maybe 2. I think it's fair to say that Legends Arceus has sold maybe 16 or 17 million copies, but in just 6 days Palworld has sold half of that. Okay, and so to say that Palworld is like this just nothing burger, it's just like this one flash in the pan, people aren't going to care about it in a month, and like, look, maybe that's true. Okay, the game is still in early access, and so the amount of content that's available in the game is maybe a little bit lower than some people might expect, but it is also only $30 on Steam. And so to say that Palworld is just the hype game of the week is maybe that's partially true, but the sales numbers certainly prove that this game is significant. This is not just some little indie thing. Like, this sold half as much as Legends Arceus in 6 days. This is objectively a actual contender and competitor to Pokemon. Okay, now look, Palworld's probably got a decade of this type of success before it could even come close to the actual brand recognition of Pokemon. So I'm not going to sit here and say that Pokemon's never going to be, you know, purchased again and Palworld's going to be the new thing. I just don't think that's going to be the case. Pokemon is obviously infinitely more popular because it's been around for what, 30 years? But for a small game development studio in 6 days, this is a massive success. And of course, it has the attention of the Pokemon Company. Forbes goes on to say Nintendo is investigating Palworld for potential IP infringement. Here's what to know about the controversial game that's gone viral. After several days of speculation, the Pokemon Company and Nintendo have signaled they are investigating Palworld, a viral Pokemon clone that has sold over 8 million copies in less than a week. Palworld is an open world survival game available for Windows PC and Xbox consoles that has stirred controversy in the past week due to its in-game characters' close resemblance to the titular creatures in the popular Pokemon games on Nintendo's system. And I think that this is a very important point that is touched on here. First of all, it's an open world survival game, so the actual gameplay of Pokemon and Palworld, the core gameplay is completely different. In fact, if you start Palworld, the first hour or two of gameplay is almost nothing like Pokemon. Like, sure, you capture a handful of creatures that you can use to sort of survive, but in reality you're focused on getting food to keep your hunger meter higher. You're focused on building weapons and shelter. These are all mechanics of Palworld that are completely absent from Pokemon, besides the fact that you can capture monsters. And so then we have to talk about what it actually means to have a copyright on something. So a copyright is a type of intellectual property that gives the creator of an original work or another owner of the rights the exclusive, legally secured right to copy, distribute, adapt, display, and perform a creative work, usually for a limited time. The creative work may be in a literary, artistic, educational, or musical form. Copyright is intended to protect the original expression of an idea in the form of a creative work, but not the idea itself. Okay, so this explicitly says that you cannot copyright an idea, and so therefore the Pokemon Company cannot copyright the idea of a game where you capture monsters. Based on my understanding of this, that is legally impossible. Okay, so it is not illegal for anybody to create a game where the fundamental gameplay loop is capturing monsters. Additionally, it appears to be the case that you can't copyright an art style. So for example, Ken Sugimori had a lot of early Pokemon artwork that was done in a sort of watercolor style, which I think is very beautiful. It's very iconic, and whenever I see something in a similar style that is sort of anime based, I usually think of the original Ken Sugimori artwork. However, that doesn't mean that Pokemon has the copyright to artwork of creatures in a sort of watercolor style. And so therefore Palworld, even though a lot of their designs or their art style might be similar to designs or art style of Pokemon in, let's say, Scarlet and Violet, you can't copyright that art style. And furthermore, you also cannot, as far as I am aware, copyright a gameplay mechanic. So for example, Fortnite can't copyright the idea of a battle royale, and of course they weren't even the first to do it in the first place, right? There was DayZ, PUBG, all these other games that came out, and so if you could, then there wouldn't be so many Tetris clones that you could find on like the Apple App Store, for example, and we would really enter into a world where, okay, well, who can create a copyright for first person shooters? Okay, who can create a copyright for 2D side scrollers? Who can create a copyright? You see what I'm saying here? So I think it's pretty obvious that you can't copyright just a gameplay mechanic. And so the fact that you use a sphere in Palworld to capture a pal does not inherently imply that they are breaking some sort of law or some sort of copyright that Nintendo holds as a result of them making the Pokemon franchise. The article goes on to say, while Pokemon allows players to capture, trade, and battle their creatures, Palworld dials up the violence by allowing players to beat up Pokemon like critters known as pals, while also allowing the characters to wield guns and other weapons. Despite the game appearing to clone popular Pokemon designs, its addition of shooting, survival, and a few other fresh mechanics, along with the fact it's not exclusive to Nintendo's consoles, appears to have struck a chord with players, with the title topping the sales chart on the PC gaming storefront Steam. Some have accused the game's publisher Pocket Pair of using AI to plagiarize popular Pokemon designs, with some users pointing to its creators' earlier comments in favor of AI use in game design, although no evidence of this has been made public. We talked about this before. The other controversy around Palworld stems from the nature of its content, as the game allows players to kill and eat their pals, put them to work in factories, or even enslave human characters. Now we're getting down the morality debate, which I honestly don't care about. But then you might be thinking, okay, well, if Nintendo doesn't have a copyright on games where you capture creatures, and they don't have a copyright on using spheres to do so, and they don't have a copyright on their art style, for example, well, what do they have a copyright on? What is legally protecting Pokemon, and why can't people just go out and create their own Pokemon-esque game? This is where trademarks come in. Okay, trademarks are a type of intellectual property consisting of a recognizable sign, design, or expression that identifies a product or service from a particular source and distinguishes it from others. A trademark is typically a name, word, phrase, logo, symbol, design, image, or a combination of these elements. So this is where we start to get into the legal protections of Pokemon. Now, when you file a trademark, and of course this depends on what country you live in, right? And so we are talking about international law here. We're talking about Japan versus the United States, and of course Pokemon is in many other countries around the world. But when you file a trademark, you have to submit what exactly you are trademarking. And so, for example, there is a trademark for Pikachu, which means that you cannot create a game where there is a creature that is called Pikachu. It is literally illegal. Now, Nintendo also has trademarks on things like Pokeball, okay, and they also have trademarks on individual designs of Pokemon. So they have a trademark on Bulbasaur. The way that Bulbasaur looks, obviously there are distinctive elements of Bulbasaur, right? So green body on all fours, has a green bulb on his back, red eyes, the dark green patterns that are on his body, okay? And as far as I could tell, they don't actually have a trademark on the literal design of every single Pokemon, but obviously some of the key ones they do. So for example, Pikachu, again, his design is trademarked. The design of Charizard, for example, is trademarked. Okay, there's a lot of designs that will legally prevent people from just taking Pikachu and putting them in their game, and anything that looks even sort of close to Pikachu, you know, yellow body, red cheeks, electric mouse, that could be challenged in court because they literally have a trademark on that design. So as we start to question the legality of Palworld, IGN posts this article: as Palworld blows up, could Nintendo successfully sue the controversial Pokemon with Guns game? Palworld is pretty much the hottest game in the world, with an incredible 8 million copies sold just 6 days after going on sale on Steam and Xbox, but it is also one of the most controversial video games in recent times, and that's because quite a lot of the internet reckons its pals look a lot like Pokemon. Developments are fast moving and dramatic. Developer Pocket Bear has said its staff have received death threats amid these Pokemon ripoff claims, which, by the way, if you've done this, you need to go outside, brother. You got to touch some grass, you got to get off the internet, you got to get off Twitter, you got to lay down, you got to take your medication. Okay, death threats over this are insane. And of course they have denied the Pokemon ripoff claims. Nintendo has moved quickly to remove an eye-catching Pokemon mod as well. Now, we did discuss this mod on a previous video on the channel, so if you missed it, go ahead and check it out. But apparently this dude had literally created a mod within just a couple of days of the game coming out. It looks like 3 days after the game came out. This individual made a mod that replaced pals with their Pokemon counterparts, and of course that's illegal, right? Of course you can't do that. We literally just talked about trademark and copyright and all that other stuff, so I think that is an open and shut case. Then this week the Pokemon Company issued a statement which we just read. That's not confirmation that Nintendo, which exclusively publishes Pokemon video games, or the Pokemon Company, intends to launch a lawsuit against Pocket Pair, but ever since Palworld came out, observers have wondered whether Nintendo will take legal action. What is the likelihood of Nintendo taking on Palworld in court? And if it does decide to bring a case, what's the likelihood of success? If Nintendo wins, could Palworld be hauled offline? IGN spoke with copyright lawyers to find out what might happen next. Now, it's also worth noting that Palworld has been in development for like 2 or 3 years now, and people have known about Pals and Palworld for a long time. And if it were, you know, legally available for Nintendo to take them down, take them to court, I think they probably would have done it before the game even started making money, right? That's just my opinion. But here we have Peter Lewin, video game lawyer at Wigan, said much would depend on which country Nintendo pursued legal action in, given the differences in IP laws across the globe. globe. The US, for example, has a notoriously permissive fair use defense, which may influence whether Nintendo pursues Pocket Pair if it decides to sue at all. But generally, copyright infringement cases ask three questions. Is the original work actually protected by copyright? Has the alleged infringer copied a substantial part of the original work? And are there any available defenses, for example, parody or fair use / dealing? On the first point, it's worth noting that ideas generally aren't protected by copyright, which you would know if you've been watching this video, because we're very smart around here. And if you made it this far into the video, I hope you'll drop a thumbs up on it. But the particular expression of an idea can be. So one company can't stop another from making a game about catching and battling monsters. However, if a company copies important aspects of how exactly another company expresses that game concept, characters, story beats, names, etc., that's where issues can arise. In this instance, the main focus seems to be on the PAL designs and 3D models rather than the game concept as a whole. And that's what we talked about before. Palworld is much more of a crafting and survival based game rather than an actual, like, you know, you're not going and collecting gym badges and you're not really like battling other trainers, right? Sam Castry, a copyright lawyer and avid Pokemon player, said it's safe to assume the Pokemon Company or Game Freak or Nintendo owns the relevant works, and so the copyrights are valid. But is there direct evidence of copying? It all comes down to similarity, Castry told IGN. Protectable expression might include things like artwork, well-developed characters or settings, and fleshed out lore. So it's not enough to have a fire and elemental dragon in the game, Castry said. That dragon would need to closely mimic Charizard's design or be described with an amalgamation of the various Pokedex entries or something like that. Let's say Nintendo takes legal action against Pocket Pair. What happens next? According to Lewin, the onus is usually on the copyright owner to prove that copying occurred, but in some legal systems this burden can actually shift to the defendant to prove that they didn't copy the work, and that just sounds awful, man. And how might Pocket Pair react to a lawsuit? Could it be forced to pull Palworld from sale? This seems an unlikely last resort, according to Castry, because of the huge sales numbers. They might change the game to alter or cut out the pals that are seen as problematic, Castry continued. They might try to negotiate some kind of settlement or licensing agreement, or they might be defiant and choose to fight the lawsuit. In that case, the first step would probably be to counter by filing a motion to dismiss the lawsuit, saying that the relevant pals aren't similar enough to the relevant Pokemon. It's worth noting that litigation is extremely resource intensive and expensive, so even if a case is brought, it might be settled before it gets too far. Disclosure could see Pocket Pair ordered by a court to make available to Nintendo documents that are relevant to the dispute, such as internal emails and game concept materials. And this would be huge, right? Because if the alleged copying of the 3D models and meshes of actual Pokemon did occur, then Pocket Pair could be in hot water here, because the court may legally require them to disclose all that information to Nintendo, and that could get really interesting really fast. Quote, naturally, if internal documents exist which suggest that intentional copying has occurred, knowing these might be revealed during the process may encourage a party to try and find an early and more discreet resolution. Even massive corporations have technically finite legal budgets and manpower, Castry added, and companies can be nervous about getting burned by bad precedents they may end up setting for themselves. For example, if a judge decides there is no infringement, that may create a blueprint for other companies to follow. So basically, I think probably the reason that Nintendo has waited a couple of days before they actually, you know, addressed this kind of drama is because they don't want to bring any attention to Palworld and its success, because if Palworld gets away with this, then other companies say, oh wow, okay, so all we have to do is build a game that is similar enough but is different in these key distinct areas and will be safe from Nintendo. They won't take legal action, we won't have to go to court and things like that. Now this lawyer casts doubt on the likelihood of a lawsuit at all. They say, I think that a lot of the alleged similarities are too trivial to withstand serious scrutiny. Everyone is allowed to have a hedgehog-like monster or a deer-like monster in their games, and their mere presence does not infringe on Shaman or Xerneas. A plant-themed monkey is not a ripoff of Pansage merely because it is a plant-themed monkey. The abstract idea of a grass monkey is uncopyrightable, and the designs themselves look nothing alike. Now, okay, nothing alike, let's be real, they look something alike. Okay, they look a little bit alike, otherwise we wouldn't even be having in this entire, like, I mean, that's Pansage, let's be honest, brother. Okay, it's not actually Pansage, but I do think they look similar enough to where we're even talking about this, right? If they didn't look at least similar, the internet wouldn't be in an uproar about this. I've seen some people complaining about Xatu being ripped off, but that's merely because Xatu and this particular pal are both birds with vaguely Mesoamerican designs, but they aren't the same bird with the same Mesoamerican designs. All in all, the vast majority of the alleged copycats don't amount to much in the legal sense. And that's exactly right. Okay, if you're a fan of Pokemon, then pointing out all the minutia little details, oh, the color schemes, the palettes, the 3D designs, the way that it stands, the way that its hair does a thing, right? Like, of course, if you're a big fan of Pokemon, then it's going to be obvious to you which components of the pals are very similar. But from a broader sense, if you take, you zoom out the general public, the general public might look at them and say those are completely different things. Like, of course they're completely different because they're not identical. Okay, and that's really what it comes down to when we look at this from a legal perspective. Are they identical? If the answer is no, I don't know, I feel like Nintendo might not actually have a very strong case here. Now, the last thing I want to say here is that the actual gameplay of both games is quite different. Okay, and I think the biggest thing that will prevent the lawsuit ever occurring is that Palworld is primarily a crafting and survival game where violence against the pals is basically encouraged, right? Like, you have to basically do it in some extent. And so the actual violent component of Palworld is so uniquely different than anything that, like, you would never experience that in Pokemon, right? You would never shoot a gun at a Pokemon in any Pokemon game. And the fact that that key distinction is actually a core focal point of Palworld proves that, sure, some of the monsters might look similar, but nobody would ever genuinely confuse Palworld as a market replacement for Pokemon, because the actual gameplay is fundamentally very different at its core. And of course, Pokemon fanboys will deny that, but if you just spend like an hour playing Palworld, it's apparent that the games are extremely different. For example, Palworld is fun and Scarlet and Violet are not. Anyway, guys, I would love to hear what you have to say in the comments section below. And once again, thank you all for all the crazy support on these recent videos. It really does mean a lot to me. And if you made it to the end of this video, consider dropping a thumbs up on it. It really helps out the channel a ton. It'll help get this video out into the YouTube algorithm so other Palworld players might see it. And consider subscribing to the channel and clicking the bell to be notified the next time that I upload a gaming news video. And with that being said, guys, thank you so much for watching. This has been Omniarch. I will talk to you guys again soon. Peace.